Boring history for sleep. How medieval Icelanders used cheese as currency. Hey guys, tonight, we drift back to a time when the wind bites your face like it holds a grudge, where the horizon stretches bleak and icy. And survival means more than just showing up, it means milking a cow before your hands go numb. You're in medieval Iceland. The land is stark, volcanic, and almost theatrically moody. It smells like sea salt and sheep, with a faint undertone of wood smoke and curdled milk. And yes, tonight's story is about cheese, lots of it. Not the shiny wheels stacked in your fancy supermarket. No, this is lumpy, sour, sometimes mold-speckled dairy that somehow held a civilization together. You're going to walk through an island where people didn't just eat cheese, they taxed it, traded it, and judged each other by the firmness of their skyr pouches. You probably won't survive this world without frostbite or lactose intolerance, but hey, no pressure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and the time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little journey travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the gravel-strewn coastline of Iceland around the year 1100. It's late summer, the only time of year when grass dares to peek through the volcanic soil. A farmer named Joran waves you over. She's kneeling beside a wooden churn, pale arms streaked with milk, rhythmically pressing curds into a muslin sack. She's not making dinner, she's making money. Well, kind of. See, in this society, money isn't shiny or jingling. There are no neat stacks of coins clinking in pouches. Icelanders of this era are only loosely connected to wider European trade networks. There's no mint, no banks, no one flipping silver coins or calling in debts like a medieval Scrooge. Instead, wealth here is measured in cows, wool, dried fish, and yes, cheese. Particularly skyr, a thick, tangy dairy product somewhere between yogurt and cream cheese. It's fermented, it's rich in protein, and most importantly, it lasts. That's key in a world where winter never really asks permission before showing up. So, Joran works every day. Because a few sacks of well-fermented skyr can mean the difference between a hungry winter and a comfortable one. She doesn't just make it for eating. She's planning to trade some for firewood. A neighbor wants to buy a knife. Another's offering a sheepskin tunic. Barter is life. Barter is everything. Historians still argue whether cheese was ever considered literal currency or more like a barter placeholder, but in this context, it's splitting way. If your skyr can buy you a roof repair, it might as well be minted silver. As you walk further inland, you notice something odd. Every homestead seems to have some kind of structure for storing dairy. Hollowed-out lava tubes, cold cellars dug into the hill. One enterprising family has even hollowed out a whale rib cage and lined it with moss and clay to make a sort of curd fridge. It smells memorable. You lean in to sniff a curd bundle drying on a rack. Mistake, it hits like someone weaponized sour cream and set it on fire. You step back quickly. No one seems offended. They're proud of their stink. The wind howls. Somewhere in the distance, a cow moos as if she, too, is sick of the weather. You pass a skinny boy delivering a basket of skyr to an older woman. In exchange, she gives him a small hand axe, iron-bladed, beautifully maintained. You blink. Was that a child just paying for a weapon with yogurt? Apparently, yes. One mainstream historical fact stands firm. Iceland's economy in the 10th to 13th centuries was largely non-monetary. While silver weighed out in ounces existed, most transactions happened through goods. Dairy, being seasonal and preservable, was central to this system. People literally counted wealth in lactation potential. A rich man was a man with cows. A richer man had cows and daughters who knew how to curdle with the best of them. Of course, there's a quirky tidbit too. Some sagas include descriptions of people being insulted over their cheese quality. Imagine being socially exiled because your skyr separated weirdly or smelled to soured. In one saga, a man challenges another to a duel after being called butterless, a truly devastating 11th century clapback. As the sun dips below the lava hills, casting long pink shadows over mossy stone, you find yourself in a small turf house. A fire crackles in the corner. The smell inside is strong wet wool, smoke, and yes, fermented milk. You sit with the family as they pass around bowls of skyr mixed with berries and a bit of honey. It's aggressively tangy. You smile and nod politely, because apparently that's dinner. And dessert, and lunch tomorrow. The father, a wiry man with hands like root systems, explains that their skyr stores will last through the winter. He'll trade some. He'll gift some to a neighboring family expecting a child, sort of like a dairy baby shower. Cheese, here, is a social bond as well as a stomach filler. He pulls out a small pouch made of seal gut and offers you a sniff. You're not sure if it's cheese or a biohazard, he grins. 4 of these, he says, we'll buy a fine cloak. Outside, the wind picks up again, howling through the cracks in the stone walls. You wrap yourself in a wool blanket and lie back against a pillow filled with dried grass. Someone's humming a lullaby, soft, meandering, sung in a language you don't understand, but somehow feel. You close your eyes. You've learned something strange tonight. Cheese may not glitter, but in this windswept land, it holds more value than gold. It sustains, it trades, it endures. And somehow, in the sour sting of skyr, you've tasted the first creamy note of Iceland's forgotten economy. You wake to the soft clatter of buckets and the low, rhythmic hum of milking. It's still dark out because, well, it's Iceland, and sunlight is more of a rumor than a guarantee. You stretch under your itchy wool blanket and step out into the morning fog, which smells faintly of moss, salt, and cow breath. The farmer, Joran, is already at work again. You see her crouched near a sturdy cow named Liv, who looks only mildly annoyed to be awake this early. You approach cautiously, still unsure of how to behave around an animal that weighs more than your Uber driver's van. Joran waves you closer and says, if she kicks, it's not personal, charming. The milk steams in the cold air, poured quickly into a wooden pail, and then carried to the small turf dairy hut. Inside, the tools of the trade are simple: stone bowls, cloth strainers, and carved wooden paddles, no stainless steel, no thermometers. Just instinct, experience, and a nose finely tuned to the difference between just right and you're about to ruin your entire winter. This is where it really starts, the cheese economy. Not in a market square, not in a treasury, but right here, in a smoky turf hut with a woman stirring curds before breakfast. Iceland's environment plays a starring role in all of this. It's not particularly generous. The soil is thin and rocky, the growing season laughably short, and forests are almost non-existent, thanks in part to over-enthusiastic Viking deforestation. So grain, nope, fruit. Hilarious, pigs, too expensive to feed. But cows and sheep, they'll eat the scraggly grass and keep coming back for more. And where there are cows, there's milk. Historians still argue whether dairy became central out of necessity or cultural preference. Some suggest Norse settlers simply leaned into what they already knew. Others argue Iceland's isolation forced innovation, turning milk from a luxury into a necessity. Either way, dairy was destiny. Milk had to be used quickly, or preserved. Fresh milk spoiled fast, especially without refrigeration or much salt to spare. So they curdled it into cheese, they separated the whey, and fermented it into skyr. Some families smoked their cheese or stored it in brine. Every household had a slightly different process, a personal twist, like Grandma's lasagna recipe, but with more curdling. As you move through the settlement, you see dairy at every stage. Some skyr is fresh, light, and tangy, almost fluffy. Other batches are darker, aged, and sharper than a sarcastic monk. A small boy offers you a taste of something he proudly calls warrior cheese, which might be a joke or might just reflect its dangerously hard texture. But here's the twist: they weren't making cheese just for the calories. They were making cheese because it stored value. A wheel of cheese represented more than food, it represented effort, time, and even trust. If you gave someone cheese, you were entering a social contract. Here's something I spent hours making from a cow I feed daily. I hope you return the favor when I need firewood or fish. It's like Venmo, but edible and prone to mold. You sit with an elder named Kettle, who tells you about his youth, how his family survived 3 brutal winters by trading nothing but cheese and wool. He speaks with reverence about a particularly potent batch of skyr that bought his older brother a boat share. Still the sourest thing I ever tasted, he laughs, except for my second wife. You make a mental note not to ask about wife number 3. The quirky part: some cheeses were so culturally distinct they had nicknames passed down like family heirlooms. Black scun was a fermented cheese aged in sheep's stomach that supposedly made your vision sharper. The hollowhead was a soft, spongy curd kept in a cow's horn for luck. Were they delicious? Doubtful. But were they respected? Definitely. At a community gathering, you watch neighbors swap dairy like trading cards. One man proudly unwraps a muslin pouch and offers it for inspection. It's met with appreciative nods and a quiet ah, the Icelandic version of now that's some good mold. Meanwhile, two women argue gently over a recent exchange. One claims the cheese she received was under a pen, essentially accusing her neighbor of selling her wet milk disguised as curd. It's the medieval equivalent of bouncing a check. The tension is palpable. A third woman intervenes with a suggestion. Let's ask Jarny. He's got a fair tongue and a sharp nose. Apparently, Jarny is the local cheese whisperer. In this world, where no one uses coins and paper money hasn't even entered the chat, cheese isn't just a placeholder, it is currency. You recall a curious historical detail. Iceland's early laws, the Graga's codes, mentioned dairy in the same breath as land and livestock. Legal disputes often hinged on food production. If someone stole your cheese, it wasn't petty theft, it was an economic blow. Some settlements even set skyr production minimums per household. Again, historians still debate whether that was practical governance or passive-aggressive shaming. But there's no question about the scale. One record mentions a seasonal gathering where over 600 pouches of skyr changed hands, each pouch roughly the size of a pillow. That's not dessert, that's GDP. You watch as a teenage girl loads freshly fermented skyr into seal bladder sacks, tying them off with sheep gut cord. Each is tagged with a small, wooden token bearing her family's rune. Her father nods approvingly. They'll trade well, he says, as if he were discussing stocks. You wonder if she lines remember the day one of those pouches helps buy a new fishing net or repairs a leaking roof. As the afternoon sun breaks weakly through the clouds, warming your chilled nose just a little, you sit on a stone fence and realize something beautiful. In a world where survival meant hoarding, these people chose to share. To trade, to lean into curdled community. A few children run by, giggling, holding sticks like swords and wearing helmets fashioned from turned-over milk buckets. They're playing cheese war. The rules are unclear, but the laughter is contagious. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you open your fridge and grumble about the expiration date on your yogurt, you'll remember Jarun's steady hands, kettles, boat-buying curds, and a world where dairy didn't just fill bellies, it kept the wheels of life turning. Even if those wheels were a little smelly. You're sitting on a wooden fence post, watching a cow slowly chew its cud while staring directly into your soul. It blinks, you blink, you lose. Welcome to the cattle economy of medieval Iceland, where cows aren't just walking milk machines, they're social capital, wealth on hooves, and your ticket to respectability. Hlif, the cow you met earlier, turns out to be a minor celebrity in the local district. Not because she's cute, though she kind of is, in a large, slightly damp sort of way, but because she produces over 3 gallons of milk a day during the lush season. That's enough to make several good-sized portions of skyr or butter an absolute jackpot when you remember most folks are bartering for firewood and socks. You follow Joran and her eldest son as they herd Hlif and her companions back into a small paddock. There's no barn in sight, just low turf shelters and windbreaks made of stone. And there's a reason for that. Icelandic cows are tough. They have to be. These aren't pampered barn cows lounging under heat lamps. These are weather-hardened beasts who've seen more blizzards than most Game of Thrones extras. A mainstream historical truth, in medieval Iceland, livestock wasn't just useful, it was currency in and of itself. The basic unit of value was the cow value, or area, a term that could represent a literal cow or a standard of worth. Legal fines, bride prices, dowries, and settlements for blood feuds were often calculated in cows. Or if not cows, their closest economic sibling, milk products. You sit beside an elder named Thorbjorg who's weaving a net. She gestures toward a neighboring field. They've only got 3 cows. That family won't be hosting many guests this winter. Ouch. Cow count equals status. A man with 10 cows. Probably a chieftain. A woman with 20. Either a dairy goddess or someone who's got the best grassland this side of the fjord. Now, here's the quirky part. You'd expect that in such a cow-centric society, people would be out measuring milk yields with complex tools or perhaps arguing over bloodlines. Not really. While they did care about milk production, they also had strong feelings, very strong feelings about the personalities of their cows. A calm, cooperative cow was beloved, a kicker, socially disgraced. Cows had names, temperaments, and even rumored vendettas. Some sagas refer to cows that took offense easily or refused to let down milk for thieves. One tale involves a man who is cursed after kicking a particularly spiritual cow named Mist. The curse: his cheese never sets again. You can't make this stuff up. Well, someone did, but they wrote it down 1,000 years ago, so now it's culture. You follow a group of young herders on their midday route. They pause by a river, letting the cows drink. One of them, a boy named Bersi, tells you about the Spring Milk Festival, a quiet celebration in some districts when the cows first give milk after winter. It means we've made it, he says simply. Not quite champagne and fireworks, but in Iceland, a good milking season is a party. Back at the homestead, you peek into the dairy shed again. The morning's milk is already separating. A wooden ladle rests across a vat of slowly curdling liquid, and the smell is not great, but not terrible, tangy, cleanish, and rich. This is the literal fruit of bovine labor. Historians still argue whether Icelanders preferred cows over sheep purely for dairy, or whether it was also about prestige. Sheep were everywhere and could be slaughtered, but cows were investments. They gave year after year, demanded pasture space, and needed real attention. You couldn't just leave a cow and hope for the best. And what came from them? Milk, butter, skyr could be transformed into trade goods. Especially cheese. Cheese could travel. Cheese could be stored. Cheese could be eaten months later in the depth of a snowstorm when the pantry was empty, the sea was frozen, and all your neighbors were giving you that. So, how's your food storage? Look, you walk with a merchant named Skyr who shows you a leather pouch filled with hardened cheese nuggets. They're incredibly dense, roughly the size of small apples, and wrapped in dried grass to prevent mold. These are for the spring fair, he says, good for trade. Soldiers like them. Yes, even Viking-adjacent warriors carried cheese into battle. Less glamorous than mead and swords, perhaps, but infinitely more useful when you're stuck in a snowstorm with nothing to eat but regret. In the late afternoon, you help a family move their cheese stock to a shaded hollow near the river. It's like a dairy migration. Children carry pouches, the elders oversee packing, and you're assigned to gently stack skyr pots lined with wool. It's a strangely sacred moment, like moving treasure if treasure could ferment. One girl, about 9, tells you her father once traded a single-aged cheese for 2 oars and a month's worth of dried cod. You raise your eyebrows. That's like trading string cheese for a yacht rental, she nods solemnly. It was a very good cheese. Later that evening, by firelight, a visiting family arrives. They've brought gifts, a cured leg of lamb, some dried herbs, and of course a pouch of cheese. The host receives it with a smile, opens it carefully, and takes a polite sniff, nods, acceptable. There's no paperwork, no handshake, just an understanding. This cheese means something. It represents goodwill, reciprocity, maybe even an unspoken promise to help in leaner times. The wind whistles against the walls again, but inside the turf house, it's warm with laughter and the clink of wooden bowls. Cheese is served with boiled grain mush. Everyone eats. Even you, although you're quietly hoping for a cracker or something resembling seasoning. As you curl up to sleep, your thoughts drift back to Hlif, chewing solemnly under the moonlight. She doesn't know she's the anchor of an entire economy. She just wants hay, a scratch behind the ears, and not to be kicked by Bersi again. But to the people of Iceland, she's so much more. She's breakfast, she's trade, she's inheritance. She's a mooing savings account wrapped in fur. And she and all her sour, creamy byproducts have kept this stubborn, windswept little island alive for centuries. You wake up with your face pressed into a slightly damp pillow stuffed with dried moss and sheep's wool. The house still smells like yesterday's skyr, which, to be fair, is probably also today's skyr. You stretch, roll over, and instantly regret it. There's a chunk of cold cheese under your shoulder. Of course there is. You step outside into the bracing morning wind. The sky is dull pewter, the kind that promises rain but delivers indecision. Down in the main yard, a group has gathered. You wander over to find them huddled around several pouches, bowls, and lumpy, cloth-wrapped bundles. It's a cheese inspection, today's topic of debate. What even counts as cheese? You'd think the answer would be straightforward. Cheese is ... cheese, right? But here, In medieval Iceland, it's not that simple. Everyone has their own method, their own secret twist. Fermentation times vary. Some use sheep milk, others cow. Some add herbs, some just cross their fingers and hope mold equals flavor. You lean in, one man unwraps a pale, wet blob and pokes it with a carved spoon. It wobbles aggressively. Fresh, he says, nodding, still soft. Good for travel. Another offers up a hard, yellowish wheel that looks more like fossilized bread. Aged to winters, he brags. You can knock a man out with it, you don't doubt it. This, you realize, is where things get complicated in the cheese as currency world. When everyone makes their own version of a product and none of them are standardized, how do you actually assign value? One mainstream historical fact: skyr, that famously thick Icelandic dairy staple, was a widespread form of preserved milk. It wasn't quite yogurt, not quite cheese, but it held a unique place in the diet and economy. Skyr was sour, protein-rich, and long-lasting, sometimes staying edible for months in sealed pouches. That longevity made it ideal for trade, but there was no official standard for skyr. One household's batch might be creamy and mild. Another's could be so acidic it doubles as paint remover. Yet both might be offered in trade for equal goods. You can imagine the awkward tension when someone opens a traded pouch only to find it s more. What is this than cheddar delight? Historians still argue whether there were informal quality tiers that regulated this bartering ecosystem. Some believe that local customs set clear standards, community consensus dictated what was acceptable, and social shaming kept people honest. Others argue that quality varied wildly, and people just learned to negotiate harder or avoid certain cheesemakers entirely. Don't trade with Hallie, someone might whisper. His skyr tastes like wet rock. You crouch down beside a young woman who is rolling skyr into little balls and dusting them with dried moss flakes. It keeps the insects off, she explains, and it makes the texture chewy. You're not sure if chewy is the endorsement she thinks it is. As she packs them into a small, wooden chest, you notice something interesting. She labels each batch with a notch code on the lid. 1 notch for spring cheese, to 4 midsummer. 3 for pre-winter batches. It's not fancy, but it's effective and early inventory system, Iceland style. And while the mainstream cheese story is all about skyr, let's not forget the fringe delights. There's missinger, a soft, almost runny dairy sludge made from the watery leftovers of curdling. It's low-calorie, high horror, and used primarily by people too poor or too proud to let any dairy go to waste. Some people swear by broginger, a rare melted cheese that involves boiling fermented curds over a fire and mixing them with sour milk and ash. Yes, ash, supposedly. It settles the stomach, or it makes you so nauseous you forget why you were hungry in the first place. But despite all the variety, and let's call it that, generously these dairy products were treated with real value. They weren't tossed casually into the trade pile. They were weighed, tasted, compared, even judged in unofficial dairy contests. You overhear one old man describing a cheese round as bold, with a hint of moss and moral failure. It's unclear whether he's complimenting it or condemning its entire existence. This brings you to the other cheese currency challenge, how it was measured. With no coins, no scales, and no standard weights, bartering required creativity. Cheese might be measured by volume, like how much fits in a bowl, or by container, 1 skin pouch equals 1 wool tunic, or even just by reputation. You stand next to a pair of farmers arguing over a trade. One insists his aged cheese bundle should be worth 2 axe heads. The other is skeptical it smells, he says, like old boots and betrayal. The debate lasts nearly 20 minutes until someone offers to taste test and settle it. There's a moment of silence as the taster chews. 1 axe head, he announces. And a small whetstone. Compromise, Icelandic style. Still, not all cheese is created equal, and not all of it survives. You peek into a storage pit and see bundles that have turned green-black and begun to collapse into themselves. To warm this summer, someone sighs, lost nearly a week's worth. In a world without insurance or refrigeration, spoilage is a real blow. And yet, people persist, because cheese, even weird cheese, equals survival. You pass a woman drying soft cheese on a flat rock in the weak sunlight. She shrugs. It's not for trade, she says. It's for the baby. He'll eat anything. You believe her. Before sunset, you witness a kind of impromptu market. No stalls, no signs, just people sitting on blankets, quietly bartering. A man offers a wheel of aged sheep's milk cheese for a new pair of shoes. The deal is sealed with a handshake and a smile. Another family swaps to skyr pouches for a week's worth of dried fish. A quiet transaction, no arguments. Everyone knows what their dairy is worth, or at least, they pretend to. As you watch, you realize that value here is less about numbers and more about trust. Cheese docenti need to be certified by a government or stamped with a king's face. It just needs to be good enough that your neighbor wants it, and that, somehow, is enough. So the next time you open a plastic tub of supermarket ricotta and wonder if it's worth it, think of the woman fermenting curds by moonlight, or the man who traded a pouch of wobbling skyr for a whole iron plow blade. Think of the ash cheese, the notch codes, the moss-dusted dairy balls. Think of a world where value isn't printed, it's stirred, strained, aged, and carried across a windswept island in a pouch tied with sheep gut. And then maybe appreciate your cheese just a little more. You return from the impromptu cheese market with a pouch slung over your shoulder. It is heavier than it looks and squishy in a way that suggests you shouldn't drop it. Inside is skyr well-aged, from what the trader claimed. You're not entirely sure what you'll trade it for, but that's the whole point, isn't it? It's currency, sort of, or something near enough to pass. Back at the homestead, you find Joran and her husband weighing curds. Not with a scale, those are rare, expensive, and mostly ceremonial, but by eye, hand, and intuition honed from years of dairy dealing. Joran lifts a wad of curd, bounces it gently in her palm, and gives a nod. This one's worth a wool cloak, if it's not soured by morning. That's an impressive trade for a handful of milk solids. You learn quickly that this is a vital skill in Iceland's barter-based economy, eyeballing value. Without coins or printed notes, you must weigh your goods in a deeply physical sense by hand, by feel, by smell, even by reputation. It's not just about how much cheese you have. It's about how good, how fresh, how long it'll last, and whether people remember the last batch you tried to pawn off. A mainstream historical fact, in the absence of a central mint or formal currency, Icelanders relied on the concept of value in kind. Goods were exchanged directly, often at gatherings like seasonal assemblies or local fairs. Cheese was measured using bowls, wooden tubs, or skin pouches, none of which were standardized. The result? Creative math and a lot of eyebrow-raising negotiations. You sit beside an elderly man named Raft as he pours curds into a linen sack. 3 of these, he grunts, should buy that whale rib you saw yesterday. You're still not over the fact that people trade with whale bones here. Then again, you're also not over the cheese that smelled like sulfur and wet hay, but that is what you get when dairy goes rogue. Hrafn explains the cheese bowl system, large, wooden bowls that, over time, became unofficial units of measure. They came in different sizes depending on region and family, so, predictably, disputes were common. A bjarna bowl, he says, rolling his eyes, holds less than a svine bowl, but try telling that to a jarnason. Historians still argue whether any true standard ever existed for these units, or whether people simply relied on honesty, peer pressure, and the occasional legal intervention. It's possible some assemblies had measuring bowls officially sanctioned by local chieftains, but most exchanges probably relied on social enforcement. If you shortchanged someone, you didn't just lose a trade, you lost trust. And that, in a small community, was economic suicide. You watch Joran ladle skyr into pouches made of seal skin. Each is tied off and labeled with a carved wooden tag bearing her family's rune. It's not just decoration, it's branding. If her skyr turns out sour or thin, word will spread. If it's thick, creamy, and keeps well, people remember that too. A cheese reputation is like a Yelp review you can't delete. Somewhere across the valley, a young man and his brother are arguing over a wheel of hard cheese that has been stored for 3 winters. The rind is cracked, but the inside looks edible, if a little dense. One insists it's still good for trading. The other swears it's only fit for baiting foxes. The debate escalates until an older neighbor steps in, takes a sniff, and declares it's worth half a fishing net, no more, no less, case closed. Cheese justice is swift and sniff-based. The quirky twist, you discover that some people cheat. Not often, but enough, A few unscrupulous traders were known to stuff their pouches with stones or ice to increase weight. Others tried to pad the cheese with moss or stale whey, hoping it would pass inspection. You ask Joran if she's ever been swindled, she snorts. Once, traded for a pouch that was mostly water. I fed it to the pigs and chased the seller off my land with a broom. Lesson learned, never scam a woman with a broom and a herd of cows. As evening falls, you sit around a fire with a group of travelers. They're from the north, near Age of Fjormur, and they brought with them an entirely different kind of cheese dryer, grainier, with a strange, smoky aroma. You try a bit, it crumbles like dried clay, but tastes oddly satisfying. Good for storage, one of them explains. Bad for teeth. They share stories of long journeys where cheese was the only food that didn't spoil. One man tells a tale of sailing through a storm, losing all their salted meat and surviving on nothing but cheese and seawater for a week. By the end, he says, I could smell colors. Whether that's true or just storm-induced hallucination, you're not sure. You start to notice how cheese forms a kind of silent backbone to every transaction. It shows up as dowry in marriage arrangements. It's part of rent payments between tenants and landowners. It's even used to settle minor disputes. Oh, you insulted my brother. Fine, 1 pouch of skyr, and we'll call it even. A teenage girl tells you that when her older sister turned 15, their father gifted her 5 sealed pouches of skyr with carved runes for luck. She buried to near a stream some kind of fertility charm and traded the rest for a new cloak and a small silver comb. Not your typical birthday haul, but then again, you're not in Kansas anymore. There's a kind of poetry to it, really. This silent, squishy currency carries more than just calories. It carries memory, value, and the weight of tradition. Every lump, pouch, and wheel represents hours of work milking, curdling, straining, fermenting, and months of planning. It's wealth, edible and perishable, held together by trust and cloth and gut string. As night deepens, the stars emerge faint, flickering, blurred by mist and wind. The hearth crackles. Someone hands you a bowl of skyr, sweetened with a pinch of honey and dried berries. It's surprisingly good, comforting, familiar now. You lean back and sip slowly, thinking about the 1,000 tiny calculations that go into each trade. How people weigh curds with their hands, how they measure trust with their noses, how they carve value into little wooden tags and let the cheese speak for them. Tomorrow, someone will trade a pouch for boots. Someone else for firewood, maybe even you, if you're feeling lucky. But for now, you're rich enough. You wake to the sound of muffled shouting. It's early, so early the sky hasn't even decided whether it's night or morning yet, but outside the turf house, a heated debate is brewing. Literally, a young man stands holding a sloshing leather pouch of skyr like it's exhibita in a murder trial. Across from him, an older woman with a red scarf planted firmly over her braids gestures wildly at a pair of muddy boots. You stand back. You sip a bowl of warm whey, trying to look invisible. The accusation. The skyr she traded him wasn't true to weight. He says it was a summer pouch labeled as spring, a grievous offense in the eyes of cheese law. She says his measuring bowl was warped, and he probably dropped it down a hill before blaming her. Now, here's where things get interesting. Because in medieval Iceland, this isn't just a petty squabble. This is a legal matter. That's right, there were actual cheese laws. You make your way toward the village meeting hall, a long low building with sod walls and a carved timber roof beam that creaks like a ship in heavy water. Inside, men and women are gathering to hold what's essentially a tiny dairy court. Not because someone's life is at stake, but because reputation is, and in this society, that's worth more than silver. A mainstream historical fact. Iceland's early legal codes, known collectively as the Graga's literally Grey Goose laws, laid out detailed regulations covering property rights, honor, theft, and, yes, dairy products. While these laws didn't include a precise cheese section in modern terms, references to milk, butter, and fermented goods are scattered throughout, often in surprising places. Take, for instance, the rule that said if you hosted a feast and promised your guests a certain amount of cheese and then failed to deliver ... you could be fined. That's right, false cheese advertising was a punishable offense. You hear someone mutter the word Joel Correir, a milk oath. Supposedly, in rare disputes, people swore dairy-related oaths to affirm their honesty. Swearing on your cows was serious business, and breaking such an oath that could lead to full-blown legal battles, public shame, or in extreme cases, exile. Historians still argue whether the milk oath was literal or symbolic. Some believe it involved placing your hand on a full milk pail and vowing truthfulness. Others think it was just metaphorical, like saying, "May my cheese never curdle if I lie." Either way, the principle is clear. Dairy was serious. The legal proceedings you're watching unfold slowly and quietly. There's no judge's bench, no gavel. Just elders seated in a circle, sipping hot broth and letting the two parties present their cases. Both have brought their disputed goods. The pouch of skyr is passed around and sniffed, poked, prodded. A cheese round is sliced open and inspected like it's evidence from a crime scene. You're waiting for someone to say, "Objection, over-fermented," but everyone is way too polite for that. Finally, one of the elders, an older man with a voice like walking gravel, makes a ruling. The pouch was misrepresented, but not maliciously. Compensation will be made with half a wheel of aged cheese and an apology in front of the house. The red-scarfed woman nods curtly. The young man bows. Balance is restored. Just another day in the Icelandic cheese court. Outside, you walk with one of the councilwomen, a sharp-eyed elder named Brynhild. She explains that legal traditions around dairy developed slowly, shaped by generations of practical concerns. "No king to set rules," she says, "so we made our own." Iceland, after all, was famously stateless for much of its early history. No monarchy, no central government, just a decentralized system of laws, agreed upon and spoken aloud at regional gatherings called alhang. These laws covered everything from property lines to homicide compensation, and cheese slid neatly in somewhere between. The quirky tidbit: cheese could be involved in marriage contracts. You heard that right. In some parts of Iceland, dairy quotas were included in betrothal agreements. A man might promise to deliver a certain amount of skyr per year to his bride's family, proving his herd was healthy and his fermentation skills up to par. One saga even tells of a man who lost his marriage bid because his butter had a taste of grass and wood ash. Imagine losing your future wife because your snack was underwhelming. Back at the homestead, you watch Joran prepare her own dairy inventory for the next local moot. She wraps each pouch tightly and labels it with a knot system. "If anyone says I shorted them," she mutters, "they can take it up with the ravens," which, you think, is Icelandic for "I will crush them." She also makes you memorize the different cheese fates, a kind of oral tradition. Cheese that's too soft, you'll be cheated. Cheese that's too hard, you'll be ignored. Cheese that smells of rot, you've made enemies. Cheese with perfect bloom, your fortune rises. You half suspect this is just a poem to teach kids fermentation, but honestly, it works. As the day winds down, you're taken to a stone shelter on the edge of the village, part storage room, part pantry, part vault. Here, the community stores high-value cheese and butter, salted and aged to perfection. It's locked, guarded, and checked regularly. It's not just food, it's asset management. You ask who decides the value of the stored cheese. "We do," Brynhild says, "together. If one family gets greedy, the others speak up. If someone's cheese goes bad, they repay it next year. It's not a bank. It's a barn with social contracts holding it up like beams." And if you're wondering whether people ever tried to steal cheese, oh yes. There are saga stories of cheese thieves being chased across icy plains, tackled mid-snowstorm, or cursed with sour milk for life. One tale describes a man who disguised himself as a priest to sneak into a neighboring farm as cheese cash. The deception worked until he blessed the wrong cow and got chased out with a dung fork. Cheese, here, is sacred. Not just in the spiritual sense, though there are whispers of monks praying over their butter churns, you'll get to that soon, but sacred in the way bread is sacred in some cultures. It's livelihood, it's law, it's legacy. As night falls again, you sit near the hearth with a bowl of sweetened whey. Outside, the wind howls its usual lullaby of sleet and existential dread. Inside, it's warm, safe, predictable except for the chunk of cheese someone just sat on. Another pouch lost to poor judgment. You close your eyes, feeling the quiet confidence of a society that somehow managed to turn milk into order, curds into code, and sour skyr into a social contract. No kings, no coins, just cheese and consequences. You're roused early again, but this time it's not shouting, just the soft shuffle of boots over frosted earth and the low hum of voices preparing for the weekly gathering. The air smells of salt and sweet smoke. You bundle yourself in a cloak still faintly scented with sheep and head toward the distant stretch of grassland, known as the Thingstead, the local site of open-air debate, dispute resolution, and, of course, trade. And where there's trade, there's cheese. The weekly thing isn't as grand as the national Alhing, but it's still a big deal. Dozens of families from the surrounding valleys converge, with ox-drawn sledges, bundles of dried fish, carved wood tools, lengths of homespun wool, and cheese in every form imaginable. You see wheels, pouches, slabs wrapped in moss, curds rolled in ash, and a proud-looking boy holding a single lump tied with a ribbon like it's the family heirloom. A mainstream historical fact, assemblies like the Thing were not just judicial. They were central to Iceland's economic life. In a society without coinage, these gatherings function like pop-up marketplaces where everything from legal cases to cheese exchanges were handled communally. There was no paper, no contracts, deals were sealed with words and witnessed by others. Memory was the bank, reputation, the interest rate. And as you watch the market unfold, it becomes clear cheese isn't just food or currency. It's performance. Traders shout their offers in rhyme. A girl plays a fiddle next to her family stall, luring customers with music as her father slices samples from a wheel hard enough to chip a tooth. You approach a grinning man who introduces his product as 3 winters aged and blessed by no less than 4 goats. You're pretty sure he's kidding, but just in case, you bow respectfully to the goats. You watch an older couple engage in a tense barter over skyr and fish. He offers a pouch of skyr aged in a birchwood tub, tangy and firm, with a rind that suggests confidence. She counters with a string of dried herring caught during the spring melt. They go back and forth, adjusting not just the amounts, but the story of the goods. His skyr is from cows-fed seaweed. Her fish were smoked using driftwood from Greenland. It's not exaggeration, it's marketing. The deal is sealed with a handshake and a nod toward the witnesses nearby. One of them raises an eyebrow just in case the fish turns out to be second-rate. Social insurance, Iceland style. Then someone yells, the skyr song, and the crowd cheers. Quirky tidbit incoming. Yes, apparently, there are cheese songs. You're drawn into a circle where 2 teenagers take turns singing verses of a trading ballad. It's half joke, half instructional chant, with lyrics about a man who tried to pass off sheep's milk skyr as cow's milk and ended up with his trousers frozen to a barrel as punishment. Everyone laughs, claps, and tosses crumbs of flatbread in appreciation. Brynhild, ever nearby, leans in and murmurs, people remember songs more than arguments, easier to carry tunes than scrolls. You nod, and jot that down mentally under medieval Icelandic TED Talk. Historians still argue whether the cheese songs were just local flavor or part of a broader oral tradition. Some believe they were mnemonic devices to help remember trade values, quality markers, and even early recipes. Others dismiss them as pure entertainment, but listening to the lyrics, you suspect they were both. As the afternoon unfolds, you begin noticing a subtle hierarchy to the market. Skyr sellers stand in clusters, often by family or region. Hard cheese traders, the big players, occupy the central ring, where competition is fiercest. Butter, interestingly, is traded mostly by women, and almost always in small, wrapped bundles that resemble little gifts. Each product is placed on carefully arranged blankets or animal hides. Presentation matters. A pouch tied with a fresh strip of bark fetches more than one sealed with frayed wool. Some traders even sent their cheese with herbs not to mask bad smells, but to hint at quality, like adding a dash of cologne to your resume. And yet, even with all the flair, the system holds together. Because here, you're what your cheese is. You pass a man trying to hawk suspiciously pale skyr. No one's buying. His pouch is lumpy. His eyes avoid contact. He starts shouting about a new technique involving melted snow and rushes. People turn away. No song, no story, no trust. Contrast that with a woman named Wara, whose stall is bustling. She's known for adding crushed juniper berries to her curds, giving them a gentle, woodsy flavor. She tells every customer the same story. Her grandmother discovered the method by accident after storing curds too close to a fuel pile. Whether it's true doesn't matter. The cheese is good. The tale makes it better. You sample it. It's sharp, creamy, and somehow earthy all at once. You'd buy her entire stock if you had anything to trade besides your boots and a confused grin. A younger boy notices your dilemma and offers a solution. Want to barter stories? He asks. Wait, what? Apparently, when short on goods, some people trade tales. Not long epics or sagas, but quick stories, rumors, riddles, local legends. You tell one in exchange for a small pouch of curds. He laughs, claps, and gives you two. The barter economy isn't just physical, it's cultural. Cheese might be king, but stories, they're the court jesters, the diplomats, and the currency of charm. As the sky turns gold with the late sun, because here, sunset is more suggestion than schedule, you notice a quiet exchange near the edge of the market. An older man and woman share a bench, barely speaking. Between them sits a single, round cheese. He nudges it forward. She nods. No words, no audience, a private deal. You never learn what it was for, but it stays with you, the simplicity of trust baked over years, like curds left in a warm barn to mature without interference. When the market finally begins to disband, the grass is covered with cheese crumbs, knotted wrappers, and the occasional broken bowl. People shake hands, kiss cheeks, sing a few farewell verses. You sit beside a fire, stomach pleasantly full, ears ringing with laughter and goat bells. Today, you didn't just learn how to trade cheese. You learned how a currency thrives without coins. How value can be measured not just in weight and taste, but in stories, songs, smells, and the twitch of an elder's eyebrow. You learned that in medieval Iceland, to sell cheese was to sell yourself, your skill, your honesty, your name, and your cheese better be as sharp as your wit. The sky hangs heavy with a slow-moving drizzle that seems more intent on dampening enthusiasm than nourishing crops, but no one's particularly upset. In fact, the drizzle feels just right, as if it's washing the slate clean after yesterday's cheese-fueled theatrics. You sip hot milk steeped with angelica root and stare out across the mist-blanketed field, where cows move like ghosts through the haze. You about to return to the turf house when Joran intercepts you with an odd request. Want to see the cheese monks? Excuse me. She smiles like she just handed you a riddle and begins walking without another word. You hurry to catch up. The path winds up a slope toward a secluded cluster of stone cells near the edge of a cliff. From here, the sea stretches into a bleak, endless hush, and the wind whistles hymns no one wrote. The buildings are squat, mossy, and humble, definitely not your standard medieval monastery, more like monastic mood lighting. A mainstream historical fact, while Iceland didn't have the grand monasteries of the European mainland, it did host several smaller monastic communities, Benedictines and Augustinians, primarily. These weren't just centers of worship, but hubs of agricultural innovation, preservation of knowledge, and yes, dairy craftsmanship. Inside the stone walls, you find a surprising scene. Rows of wooden shelves lined with cheeses in various stages of aging. Some are round and golden, others gray and lumpy with fuzz that looks suspiciously alive. The air smells like damp wool and divine fermentation. A soft-spoken monk greets you. His name is Brother Kettle. He's wearing robes stained with whey and holds a wooden paddle used to flip cheese rounds during aging. He motions for you to follow him through the chapel, which is just a room with a painted rock and the faint sound of bees humming in the ceiling. In a side room, two more monks are chanting not in Latin, but in Old Norse and stirring a huge vat of milk with almost devotional focus. It's the monastic version of a startup kitchen. Brother Kettle explains that they're remaking a special variety of hard cheese aged in smoked sheep bladder. He refers to it with a tone that implies reverence or possibly fear. Very strong, he says. You may see visions. You politely decline the sample. He continues, explaining how monks often kept detailed records of their dairy processes, tracking weather, grass quality, and even the moods of their cows. A happy cow gives holy milk, he says with a straight face. We think so. Anyway, you nod. You're not about to argue with a man who blesses his curds. Quirky tidbit alert. There are fragments of Icelandic psalms that appear to include references to dairy. One obscure chant is believed by some scholars to contain a metaphor likening spiritual purity to the clear whey that rises from curdled milk. Others think it's just monks being bored during milking hours. Historians still argue whether these references were symbolic theology or simply poetic multitasking. You're led into a chamber that functions as their cheese vault. Here, aged rounds rest on beds of ash and herbs, each tagged with carved runes noting the batch, date, and blessing. Some cheeses are marked with crosses, Others have tiny animal figures carved on them: goats, birds, whales. One has what appears to be a tiny Viking ship. You point it out. Brother Kettle smiles faintly. That one's for long journeys, he says. Good cheese helps you survive bad seas. Later, over a shared meal of porridge and bread, the monks explain how, during lean seasons, cheese production became a spiritual exercise. You can't rush it, one says. You wait, you listen, you stir gently, like prayer. One monk, clearly the heretic of the group, jokes, "The Lord works in mysterious way." The others groan. After the meal, you help clean curd cloths and hang them to dry near a fire. There's a rhythm here, quiet, repetitive, calming. The monks rise early, sing often, and measure time not by bells, but by how far along a batch of cheese has matured. One elder monk tells you that, during periods of famine, monastic cheese stores often kept surrounding villages from starving. The monks would ration aged rounds, offering them in exchange for firewood, fish, or simple labor. Their cheeses weren't just religious artifacts, they were lifelines. This humble generosity made the monks both respected and, at times, targets. In one half-whispered tale, a rival clan once attempted to raid a monastic cheese cave during a particularly harsh winter. The story goes that the monks blocked the tunnel and flooded it with whey, trapping the intruders until they swore a holy vow never to touch sacred dairy again. Historians still argue whether this incident ever happened, or if it was just invented by monks to scare off future cheese thieves. Either way, you admire the creativity. Flooding someone with fermented milk, that's devotion. Before you leave, Brother Kettle offers you a small wax-wrapped parcel. Inside is a sliver of their finest aged cheese so sharp it makes your jaw ache and your thoughts, oddly, more poetic. You swear the wind sounds different now. As you make your way back down the hill, the world seems slower, softer. The idea that monks spent their days making, aging, and protecting cheese with the same care others might give to scripture doesn't feel strange anymore. It feels obvious. What else would they do in a land where snow outlasts sunlight and silence is the loudest voice? You think back to a quote Kettle said just before you left: "Cheese does not hurry." Neither should we. It lingers. Back in the village, Jorn inspects your wax-wrapped gift. "Monk cheese," she asks, impressed. "Don't eat it all at once, or do. If you start speaking in tongues, we'll know it's real." You tuck it away, half for safety, half for ceremony. As the day fades, you wonder how many prayers have been whispered over curds, how many secrets sealed in wheels, how many blessings passed not through gold or relics, but through a wedge of fermented hope wrapped in wax. Monks didn't just make cheese, they made calm. You wake to the sound of rain tapping rhythmically on the turf roof, a soft percussion that could lull even the most caffeinated traveler back to sleep. But something stirs you, a sense of curiosity. Maybe it's the memory of the monkess, words from yesterday echoing through your head. Cheese does not hurry. Neither should we. A fair motto, but today, you're in a hurry. Because today, Brynhild has promised to take you to the cheese archives. No, not scrolls of recipes bound in vellum or marble halls echoing with footfalls. You're thinking far too Roman. This archive is Icelandic, which means damp, cold, buried, and somehow more magical for it. You wrap up and follow her through the drizzle, across the marsh, and toward a series of sunken huts built into the earth. From the outside, they look like old mounds covered in moss. But as you stoop into the entrance, the air grows cool and dense. A narrow passage, lined with stones slick from condensation, leads into a chamber that smells like time itself: smoke, salt, old milk, and a whisper of mold. This is no ordinary storage room. It's a dairy vault. A mainstream historical fact: Icelanders stored cheese and butter in cool, underground pits or dugouts called njokerns, literally milk houses, some of which doubled as repositories for wealth. Since cheese and butter held trade value, these spaces were designed not just for preservation, but for protection from weather, animals, and the occasional desperate neighbor. Brynhild lights a small oil lamp, revealing shelves carved directly into the stone. Each nook cradles a wrapped or potted dairy treasure: smoked skyr, herb-aged curds, wheels sealed in beeswax, jars of whey preserved like jelly. "I call this one skyrner," she says, pointing at a particularly aged lump. "Because it has its own weather system." She's only half joking. A wisp of steam rises when she lifts the lid. You notice that every cheese has a symbol, some carved, some painted, some burned into bark-wrapped packaging, they're not just marks of ownership. They're part of the archive itself, a kind of edible catalog system. This was never just food, this was information. Brynhild explains how each family developed its own dairy sigil, part rune, part brand logo. A twist of goat horn for bold flavor, a line of dots for curdled under the new moon. Crossed branches for smoked in pine wood. It's a secret language, one passed between generations like a grandmother's smirk at a shared joke. Quirky tidbit time. A few families were rumored to encode secret messages into their cheese markings, not just flavor notes, but gossip, warnings, or even matchmaking hints. One piece of folklore speaks of a young woman who was gifted a skyr pouch by a suitor. Inside, she found his family symbol. And her own, interlinked, scandalous, sweet, mildly tangy. Historians still argue whether these markings were truly communicative or simply a practical necessity in a world where paper was scarce and cheese theft was a felony-level offense. Either way, you're now looking at centuries of dairy-based storytelling, one moldy shelf at a time. Brynhild hands you a particularly lumpy package wrapped in moss and tied with hair-thin twine. "This one's over 20 winters old," she says. "Was buried during the winter of the goat plague. See the mark. You squint. It's a circle surrounded by jagged spokesmen to symbolize protection. No one wanted to open it," she adds with a grin. "We were afraid it might still contain the plague. You set it down very, very carefully. And here's the thing. These cheese vaults weren't merely culinary. They were strategic. When a family stored cheese, they weren't just thinking about dinner. They were thinking about leverage. Come winter, when fish dried up or lambs fell sick, it was the cheese cache that got you through, or that bought you favors. Or that was secretly smuggled to a cousin in exchange for firewood and a promise not to marry that awful Thorbjorn from downriver. Cheese wasn't just stored, it was staged. And the archives weren't just pantries, they were chessboards. In one corner, Brynhild shows you what she calls the family ledger. It's a series of flat stones, each with carved lines, dots, and small grooves. She explains that some families use these tactile records to track what was stored where, how much had been traded, and when to turn or inspect each batch. It's a hands-on memory palace. Imagine managing your pantry via Braille. Some cheeses are missing from their slots. Brynhild tells you that they were likely used in dowries or bride prices, or melted down to feed the sick during the long dark months when nothing fresh could be coaxed from the land. This prompts a quiet moment. You realize just how many memories were preserved in these shelves: weddings, famines, disputes, alliances, not written in ink, but pressed into curds and stored in silence. You notice a sealed crock with a wax stamp you recognize from yesterday as Market, the woman with the juniper cheese. She stores hers here. You ask. Brynhild nods. Sometimes neighbors share vault space. If they trust you, trust again. Always the invisible currency behind the edible one. The rain intensifies outside. It drums above you like a lullaby played with fingertips. Brynhild sets down the lamp and kneels to rearrange a cluster of pouches. The older ones migrate down, she mutters, like birds that can't fly anymore. You help, slowly shifting pouches, weighing them gently in your hands. One is unexpectedly light. Another sloshes like it's gone fully liquid. "That one's sleeping," Brynhild says. "It'll come back." You don't know if she's joking. You decide not to ask. By the time you leave, your clothes smell like earth, wax, and a faint tickle of mold. You're chilled, but content. The archives weren't what you expected. They weren't grand, they weren't official. But they were meticulous, ancient, sacred in a stubborn, mossy kind of way. They were a reminder that even the smallest societies can build great systems. That you don't need gold coins or ledgers to preserve wealth, just patience, trust, and a cool, quiet place underground. And maybe a cheese that's been aging longer than you've been alive. As you step into the evening drizzle, you glance back once more. The mossy door closes behind you like a lid on history itself. You're walking along a ridge now, boots squelching in the sodden earth, the sea wind flapping at your cloak like a curious raven. Below you, the fields stretch into wet swells of grass and stone, dotted with sheep who stare like they know something you don't. Above, clouds press down in a low, grumbling ceiling. It's another normal Icelandic day, dramatic, soggy, and slightly mystical. Brynhild's voice cuts through the gusts, ready to see a cheese feud. You freeze, like a modern one, she laughs. "Oh, no, Very old, but still fresh, and with that pun, she descends toward a broad, flat plain where the remains of a longhouse lie half sunken in turf. The story she is about to tell is both local legend and historical footnote, a perfect little swirl of absurd and important. It begins with two neighboring families, the Arnesons and the Hulkelsons, who lived a few valleys apart in the late 1100s. Both were moderately wealthy. Both owned a decent amount of land, and both produced excellent cheese. Now, if this were France, maybe they'd have dueled over vineyards. But this was Iceland, so naturally, they dueled over curd. A mainstream historical fact, in medieval Iceland, disputes over grazing rights, resource access, and food production were common, so common, in fact, that the sagas are riddled with court cases involving seemingly minor conflicts that spiral into major feuds. Legal wrangling wasn't just for nobles, even cheesemakers got litigious. It started, Brynhild says, when Arneson's cow was discovered grazing in Hulkelson's meadows. The grass was supposedly sweeter there, richer in flavor, and laced with wild herbs that lent an edge to the milk. Arneson claimed it was accidental. Hulkelson, a man not known for emotional flexibility, disagreed. At first, it was small gestures cutting off trade, withholding skyr jars at market, not returning borrowed butter churns. Then came the blodkyrja. That's Old Norse for curse curd. Quirky tidbit alert. Some Icelanders believed you could curse a batch of cheese. By whispering certain words while stirring or burying specific herbs in the milk, you could make the final product bring misfortune or gastrointestinal distress to its consumer. It was like dairy-based witchcraft, with fewer warts and more sourness. Hulkelson accused Arneson of gifting him a blodkyrja, disguised as a wedding gift. The bride's family allegedly suffered bloating for 3 days. One person sneezed every time they said curd. It was considered suspicious. Things escalated. Arneson's cheese racks were found overturned one morning. Hulkelson's skyr pits were mysteriously salted. No one saw who did it, of course, but both sides hired neighbors to watch their herds and inspect all dairy gifts before accepting them. Historians still argue whether these events were exaggerated in later retellings or whether rural communities genuinely believed in cursed cheese. But whether magic was real or not didn't matter. The belief was enough to fuel the fire. Eventually, the feud reached the local wing, Iceland's open-air parliament. Both families arrived with witnesses, examples of cheese allegedly tampered with, and in one case, a sworn testimony from a cowherd who claimed to have heard whispering near the curds at dawn. Imagine standing before a judge, earnestly debating the spiritual safety of cheddar. The case dragged on. Multiple arbitrators were called. In the end, the verdict was dramatic, but oddly satisfying. Both parties were ordered to cease all cheese-related hostilities, pay restitution in the form of cows and sheep, and this is your favorite part, exchange a formal peace wheel. That's right, they had to make a cheese together. Brynhild grins as she tells you this. The peace cheese, she says, took both families a full week to agree on the recipe. They compromised by using one herd's milk and the other's aging method. The wheel was aged for 9 months, wrapped in runeketched bark, and presented during the midsummer festival with much ceremony and an awkward group hug, you assume. Did it work? Sort of. The families never feuded again, though. They also never traded cheese directly. They just smiled tightly across the market stalls, like divorced in-laws sharing custody of a fondue pot. You sit on a stone near the ruined longhouse, imagining the pettiness, the drama, the whispered enchantments over bubbling milk. This was Icelandic justice and Icelandic dairy diplomacy. Brynhild rummages in her pack and pulls out a small round wrapped in linen. Inspired by the peace cheese, she says. We make one every year to remember. Blend of juniper and smoked whey. Very persuasive flavor. You bite in. It's sharp, slightly resinous, and finishes with a note that feels suspiciously like forgiveness. As the wind rises and the grass ripples like foam, you reflect on what it means to live in a world where cheese was not just nourishment, but narrative. It held grudges, it offered apologies, it demanded resolution. Later that night, the villagers gather for a storytelling circle. No stage, no microphones. Just a ring of people around a fire pit, passing around bites of cheese and sipping warm whey-spiced ale. You sit between a pair of older men who argue about whether the original peace cheese included sheep-s milk. One source says so, one grunts. Bah, the other snorts. That source also said trolls taught us butter churning. Around the fire, stories pile up like driftwood. One woman claims her grandmother used to slice cheese into runes and leave them under her pillow for dreams. Another swears her great-uncle once bribed a chieftain with aged goat cheese wrapped in birch bark and got a whole fishing boat in return. Good cheese, she shrugs, opens doors, no one disagrees. As the flames flicker and the night deepens, someone sings an old song about a cow who wandered into a troll cave and emerged with milk that could cure heartbreak. The chorus is haunting. You hum along, it's not hard to believe, not anymore. Out here, cheese isn't just a food, it's a language, a peace offering, a declaration of war, a love letter, and, sometimes, just something to nibble while you eavesdrop on saga-level gossip. The morning light is gray and thin, like someone forgot to fully charge the sun. You stretch beneath a thick woolen blanket, limbs heavy from the night's fire-warmed storytelling. Your brain, still steeped in legends of cursed cheese and peace wheels, feels half dream, half dairy. Brynhild greets you with a sly grin and a mug of barley tea. Hope you didn't have troll dreams, she says, handing over a heel of rye bread slathered in something suspiciously buttery. You chew, pause, then point. This isn't butter. Ah, she nods, mock solemn. It's butter cheese. Very different. Today's journey takes you deeper inland, where stone paths twist into folds of hills, and the air smells less like sea spray and more like iron and moss. You re-heading toward what locals call the cheese exchange road-a-trade route, once crucial for transporting perishable dairy goods between isolated communities. It's less a road and more a rugged suggestion of direction, but it tells a remarkable story. A mainstream historical fact: in medieval Iceland, formal roads barely existed. Instead, routes were memorized through landmarks, boulders shaped like horses, streams with peculiar echoes, lone birch trees at the edge of visibility. Traders walked for days, carrying skyr, curds, or pressed butter in wax-lined bags or hollowed animal horns, exchanging them for barley, fish, or tools. Brynhild shows you a smooth stone slab set into the hillside. Weathered but unmistakable, it's marked with parallel grooves, drag lines from centuries of sleds, pulled by men, ponies, and in some truly desperate winters, goats. You follow the route, winding past the remains of ancient stopping points, slow, circular walls where travelers once camped, swapping news, cheese, and occasionally lice. One such site, Brynhild explains, was known as Skyr, literally Skyr Hill, because people believed you had to spill a spoonful of skyr at its base to ensure good weather on the journey ahead. Quirky tidbit alert: according to one 14th century poem, a traveling merchant named Snabejern carried a satchel of cheese that he refused to share at Skyr. Later that day, he was struck by lightning. Whether divine punishment or coincidence, the tale became a warning for tight-fisted travelers. Historians still argue whether places like Skyr were genuinely seen as sacred, or simply gained reputations over time through cautionary tales and dairy-based gossip. Either way, you'd be lying if you said you didn't accidentally drop a spoonful of yogurt, just in case. Along the trail, Brynhild points out a series of flat rocks embedded like stepping stones. These, she says, were part of a cheese-weighing station. Traders arriving from different regions would stop here to compare their goods not by coin, but by heft. Each community had slightly different standards, so informal weighing areas helped level the dairy playing field. You kneel beside one, and imagine the scene: cloaked figures haggling over mold-ripened skyr, adjusting bundles with rocks to hit the right trade weight, grumbling about last season's weather, and someone's goat who definitely wasn't purebred. As the sun breaks through the clouds finally, making a late appearance, you arrive at the remnants of an old trade shelter. It's nothing more than a few leaning walls and a blackened hearth, but Brynhild stops with reverence. This, she says, was where the cheese pact happened, and here comes another tale. One laced with friendship, rebellion, and of course a suspiciously perfect wheel of cheese. In the mid-13th century, to distant villages, Hyltastawir and Meglyfell were on the verge of open hostility. The reason? Access to freshwater pastures. Cows from Hyltastawir had begun grazing upstream, tainting the river Meglyfell relied on for washing and dairy preparation. Rumors flew that Meglyfell's cheese had turned bitter, soured by resentment and cowpea. Instead of drawing swords or slinging curds, the two communities proposed a neutral meetup at this very shelter. Each sent their most respected dairy elder. Think Gandalf, but with an apron and aged palms that smelled like goat's milk. Quirky detail: one of them, Hortus the Crumbler, traveled 70 miles on a sled pulled by sheep. She insisted her joints were too proud for ponies. The parley lasted for days. Stories say it rained the whole time. But when the skies cleared, the elders emerged with a pact, shared pasture access, alternating weeks, and a co-produced cheese to commemorate the truce. This co-cheese, half smoked, half fresh, became a symbol of compromise. Called samblanda, or mixed together, it was crafted every solstice for the next 100 years, often shaped like a perfect spiral, meant to represent the merging of rivers. Historians still argue whether the Samblanda Pact was strictly enforced or more ceremonial. But archaeological digs near Hjultastaðir have unearthed mold cultures in ceramic pots containing both smoking residue and fresh herb traces, suggesting, at least, the cheese was very real. You sit for a moment in the trade shelter, feeling the wind snake through the cracks. The stones are still warm from the sun, and you imagine all the conversations that once echoed here. Barters, brags, apologies baked into each dairy deal. Brynhild unpacks a small wedge from her satchel. "Today's samblanda," she says, slicing a sliver. "Mint from Maglyfell, smoked away from Hjultastaðir. Still made the same way. You taste it. It's creamy, surprising, and oddly balanced, like a handshake between two very stubborn grandmothers." You keep walking, following the cheese road as it dips into a valley painted with moss and echo. Brynhild tells you that this route was used not only for trade, but also for migration. Entire families once packed up their dairy goods and herds, moving from worn-out pastures to newly thawed meadows. In one story, a woman carried an entire dowry of cheese strapped to her back, using a cradleboard meant for infants. When asked if it was heavy, she replied, "No heavier than marrying a fisherman." Even in motion, Icelanders never strayed far from their curds. By late afternoon, the trail ends at a fork in the hills, one path leading to the coast, the other to the highlands. Brynhild stops. "You've walked the old cheese road," she says. "Some folks do it barefoot, to feel the same stones their ancestors did." You glance down at your boots, no regrets. As you settle in for the night, a gust of wind stirs the campfire. In its flickering light, you see your journey differently now, not just a quirky tale of cheese-based economics, but a map of human movement, trust, and connection. These trails, these stories, these wheels of time-warped dairy, they're always people held on to meaning in a world too cold, too wild, to tame alone. You lie back under the stars, belly full of cheese, mind full of ancient footsteps, and somewhere nearby, a sheep sneezes. You're beginning to understand something important, something almost sacred. In medieval Iceland, cheese wasn't just cheese, it was portable memory. A personal diary, if that diary smelled faintly of juniper and whey. With every village you've visited, every crumb you've nibbled, you've uncovered a layer of this strange, storm-tossed culture where curd counted for more than coin, and flavor carried more history than most books ever could. This morning, Brynhild leads you to one of the oldest remaining fjarhus, or sheep barns, nestled into a slope, so mossy it practically purrs underfoot. You have to duck beneath the entrance, stepping into shadow. The air is damp, and it smells like wool, hay, and no surprise cheese. "Ever hear of cheese vaults?" she asks. Your eyebrows do a polite little dance. "Like bank vaults, exactly," she says. Except stinkier. A mainstream historical fact. In medieval Iceland, food preservation was both a necessity and an art form. Caves, turf shelters, and root cellars were all used to store everything from fermented shark to barley porridge to, yes, cheese. These cheese vaults were communal or family-run storage sites, sometimes hidden, sometimes heavily guarded. Inside the barn, Brynhild points to a trapdoor covered with a slate slab. Together, you heave it open and descend into a dim chamber, walls slick with age. "Here," she says, "is where her ancestors stored their dairy dowries, large wheels and sealed pots meant to last through famine, raids, or unusually long winters." She lights a lantern, revealing row upon row of shallow indentations carved into the stone. Each once cradled a wheel of cheese, like a nursery for the edible and divine. And yes, some of these wheels, incredibly, still exist. In a nearby museum, you'll later see one, dark, shrunken, and hard as rock. Thought to be over 800 years old. It probably tastes like shame and shoe leather, but that's not the point. It's survival, fossilized. Quirky tidbit alert. One family in southern Iceland reportedly had a tradition of never eating the final wheel of each batch, calling it the Holduntarhjul, or hidden knight's wheel. It was believed to bring protection if left uneaten. In one case, a grandmother smuggled the same wheel through 3 volcanic eruptions. When asked why she didn't just eat it, she said, "I trust it more than I trust men." You sip warm whey while sitting on a stone shelf, surrounded by ghost cheese echoes. It's quiet here, in the belly of the barn. Peaceful in that specific Icelandic way that means serene, but possibly haunted. Brynhild talks about value, not market value, but emotional one. A good cheese was more than its flavor. It was a story you could age, cut open, and taste again. That's why families guarded their best wheels. Not because they were rich, but because they were irreplaceable. You emerge into the daylight blinking and slightly cheese-scented. She takes you next to a spot called St. Germflit, or Starfield, not because of any astrological reason, but because it's where several important trade stars, meaning farmers of note, not celestial bodies, once gathered every spring to compare their cheeses under the open sky. Think of it like a medieval Icelandic cheese fair. Fewer booths, more sheep. Each year, farmers would bring their best wheels, hard-aged, soft-ripened, flavored with thyme or wild garlic, and hold informal competitions. Winners were chosen not just by taste, but by longevity, structure, and aroma. Oh, and there were songs. Brynhild pulls out a little pamphlet of reconstructed lyrics, rhyming couplets, praising particularly creamy batches, or warning against oversalted skyr. One line reads, "Bless the hand that churns with grace, lest sour shame take butter's place." Historians still argue whether these festivals were competitive in the modern sense or more performative, a chance to brag, flirt, and swap techniques. But fragments of poetry, old trade records, and deeply biased family lore suggest that, yes, at least a few people took their cheese crowns very seriously. You sit on a flat stone where one of the cheese judges once sat. Brynhild hands you a slice of smoked goat gouda wrapped in birch bark. "A recreation," she says, "of the 1263 champion." You take a bite. You swear it tastes like spring wine and the sound of hooves. The rest of the afternoon is spent wandering across pastures once filled with tents and cheese-laden sleds. Brynhild recounts an infamous cheese heist in 1342, when one trader tried to smuggle extra wheels by sewing them into a horse's saddlebags and hiding them beneath wet hay. He was caught, fined, and forced to write a public cheese apology poem. Apparently, it was quite bad, rind mold with cold fold, she winces. By dusk, the sky opens into a rare clarity, stars pricking through the deepening blue. You lie back on the grass, your belly content and your brain gently melted from the day's stories. Above you, constellations shimmer, and just for a moment, you imagine their wheels of cheese strung through the cosmos. Some firm and bright, others soft and sagging, the Milky Way, if you will. You turn to Brynhild. "Why cheese?" you ask. She shrugs, curling her knees to her chest. "Why anything? It lasts, it travels, it forgives us for changing." In the quiet, her words hang like mist above the moss. The wind smells faintly of thyme. You begin to drift. You wake to silence, the good kind, the hush of dawn before the sheep start bleating, before the wind picks a direction. Brynhild is already up, tossing a flat stone across a still pond nearby. You count 7 skips before it sinks, which feels like some kind of omen. Probably one about luck, or lactose. Today's walk takes you through a different kind of Iceland. Less cheese trails, more legal tales. Brynhild announces you're heading toward Lingvellir, the site of the ancient Alþingi, Iceland's first parliament, and the place where law, custom, and consequence came together under wide skies and beside a rift in the earth. A mainstream historical fact, the Alþingi was established around 930 CE and is considered one of the oldest parliaments in the world. Chieftains, known as Gogr, would gather here annually to settle disputes, pass laws, and occasionally just flex their political cheese muscles. Because yes, even here, in the hallowed cradle of early Icelandic law, cheese played its part. As you approach the broad plain of Lingvellir, the first thing you notice is how it just feels important. The cliffs rise up like cathedral walls, framing the grassy basin below. You can picture the gatherings, tents dotting the field, people wrapped in cloaks of wool and pride, horses snorting, someone probably yelling about sheep again. Brynhild points out a flat-topped rock near the center. "That was the low rock," she says. "And that," she gestures toward a smaller, shadier patch, "was the dairy arbitration area." You blink. "They had a whole section for cheese long." "Oh yes," she says. "And you'd be surprised how heated it got." According to surviving records, some of the most bitter feuds brought to the Helsinki involved cheese, misrepresented trade weights, spoiled wheels passed off as fresh, dowry promises unfulfilled because someone delivered butter instead of skyr. One famous case from the 11th century involved a farmer named Bjarki the Unsoft, who was sued by his neighbor for supplying unripened, hollow-hearted cheese as part of a marriage agreement. The court ruled in favor of the bride's family, and Bjarki was ordered to pay compensation for full wheels aged no fewer than 12 months, plus one sheep, preferably with a decent personality. Quirky tidbit alert: during one Helsinki, a woman named Halla Rarirna Halla Three Corners, allegedly because of her oddly shaped hat, successfully argued that her rival's cheese was fraudulent because it squeaked too loudly when cut. Her argument hinged on what she called the sorrowful squeak, a trait she claimed proved the cheese was made during a solar eclipse, a time considered unlucky and, therefore, legally suspect. Historians still argue whether these cheese-related laws were genuinely enforced or more symbolic and edible stand-in for deeper issues like land rights, dowry fraud, or general neighborly grumpiness. But what's clear is this: cheese had standing. And not just literal wheels standing in line at court. Brynhild shows you one of the old law scrolls preserved now in facsimile form. There's an entire section labeled Mjölkarlg, or milk laws, outlining everything from acceptable brining techniques to fines for knowingly selling moldy dairy without a beer's blessing. Yes, mold was okay, as long as it was consensual. You sit on a stone bench carved by centuries of sitting. The wind rushes through the rift behind you, that tectonic scar where continents drift apart at the pace of growing fingernails. Somehow fitting, in this land of slow change and slow fermentation, the pace of cheese and law aren't so different. Brynhild hands you a small chunk of tangy brown cheese. "This one's named legal loaf," she says with a wink. Aged exactly the number of days the Helsinki used to last, you chew. It tastes complex, like compromise, and just a little bit of spite. As you walk deeper into Lyngvellir, the rocks narrow into a sort of canyon. Here, beneath overhang cliffs, disputes were often mediated quietly, away from the crowds. This was the informal zone, where family members could negotiate before things got to public. One particularly juicy tale: in 1237, two brothers met here to resolve a cheese heist that had nearly turned violent. One accused the other of hiding his best wheel under a dog kennel to avoid sharing it during a feast. Instead of denying it, the accused simply sliced off a piece and said it was worth hiding. Some say they made peace right there, trading cheese until the sun set. Others say they cursed each other's livestock for 7 generations. You choose to believe the first version. That evening, you camp near the Helsinki site, wrapped in a blanket of sheep's wool that smells faintly of history. The stars come out early, bright against the flat dark of the plain. Brynhild sits beside you, carving runes into a small piece of driftwood. "They took cheese seriously," she says, "not just as food, but as proof of fairness, of tradition, of identity." You think about that. In a world where coins were rare, where paper meant privilege, a wheel of cheese wasn't just nourishment, it was a witness. You close your eyes, listening to the soft crackle of the fire, the distant gurgle of the rift behind you, and maybe, just maybe, the sorrowful squeak of an eclipse-born cheese echoing through time. The wine changes before you even finish your morning skyr. Gone is the soft breeze from yesterday today. It's sharper, louder, and smells like old stones and damp wool. Brynhild tightens her cloak and nods uphill. "Today we talk about failure," she says, "about when the cheese, well, didn't save anyone." You climb slowly, boots pressing into peat, the kind of climb that forces you to think. The higher you go, the less green you see, like in clings where grass used to be. Shrubs shrink into the dirt like they're afraid to be noticed. There are no animals in sight, only ruins. A mainstream historical fact: between the 13th and 15th centuries, Iceland went through multiple periods of severe hardship, famine, harsh winters, volcanic eruptions, even the Little Ice Age. These events devastated agriculture, and with it, the dairy production that underpinned local economies. Cheese couldn't fix everything, Brynhild says as she steps into what's left of an old turf farmstead. Just the curved bones of a roof now, like a ribcage laid open to the sky. In one particularly brutal winter 1362, during the eruption of Griffidskalashfall poisoned grazing land. Cattle starved, without milk, no cheese, without cheese. No currency, no rent, no feasts, no trade. You stand in the doorway of the ruin, imagining a family huddled together, not because of love but necessity. A mother counting the last curds of last summer's batch. A child begging for skyr when there's only salted fish. A father pretending sour whey is fine to drink. You probably wouldn't have survived this, they did barely. And some didn't. Quirky tidbit time. There's a fragment of a folktale about a woman named Svala who, after running out of proper food, tried to ferment moss mixed with sheep's milk in a desperate attempt at faux skyr. Supposedly it worked well enough that neighbors accused her of witchcraft. One man reportedly said, "It tastes too good for her to have made it honestly," which is either an insult or a very specific compliment. Brynhild explains that in the hardest times, cheese stopped being traded and started being hoarded. Hidden, guarded like a dying fire, it stopped functioning as currency and became a private insurance policy. People who had extra didn't share not because they were cruel, but because they were terrified. You walk past an old cheese vault built straight into a cliff. The wooden door still hangs there, barely. Inside, stone shelves stretch back into darkness. It feels like a tomb. You imagine opening one of those wax-sealed jars, only to find it filled with air and regret. Historians still argue whether Iceland's dependency on dairy during these dark years was admirable resilience or a dangerous over-reliance on a single fragile food chain. Some believe communities that diversified more fish, more root vegetables fared better. Others insist it wasn't about planning, it was about luck. Where you lived, where the wind blew the ash. As the afternoon wears on, you follow a winding path to a monument, just a simple stone marker. On it is carved, "Til minningar lau sem lifku afmi skyr sem skyled," in memory of those who survived with skyr as their shield. You sit there for a while. Brynhild leaves you be. It takes a long time to process this quieter part of the story. The part where cheese isn't trade or diplomacy or even pride but survival. The last spoonful of something soft when everything else is hard. The thing you hide beneath the floorboards, not because it's valuable to someone else, but because it might just get your family through the month. You eventually rise and follow Brynhild down the hill to a more cheerful spot, a working farm that still produces cheese using traditional methods. The smell hits you before you even see the barn. Sharp, nutty, slightly grassy. Life, reborn. Inside, wheels of cheese rest on wooden planks. Young wheels, hardening under linen cloth. You watch a woman dip curds into wooden molds, pressing them with smooth stones. See this. Brynhild says, pointing to a batch labeled "Mohir turned, Mother Lost." It's named for a woman who gave away her last skyr jar during the 1424 famine. No one knew her name, just that she was hungry and still shared. You take a piece of that cheese. Let it melt slowly on your tongue. It's sharp, honest, sad, but not bitter. You sit by the hearth that evening, wrapped in warmth and wool. A sheepdog snores under the table. The fire crackles, the way fires do when they know they're the only light in a world of long nights. Brynhild pours you a small glass of Huysnaps, don't ask, and raises her own. "To the stubborn," she says. "And to the cheese that made them so." You toast, you drink. It burns slightly, but it's a good burn. And as the wind rattles against the shutters and the stars hide behind cloud, you think about the quiet courage of people who could look at a bucket of curdled milk and see hope. Sometimes sour, sometimes sweet, always stubborn. You wake to a soft gray sky, the kind that promises nothing more than mild drizzle and quiet hours. The world is calm today, and so are you. Brynhild doesn't speak at first. She simply hands you a slice of black bread and a thick wedge of cheese, crumbly, aged, with a smell that borders on philosophical. You chew slowly. It tastes like old stone cellars and maybe a little revolution. You're walking through a low valley now, where fences are new, sheep are fat, and cheese is no longer hidden like treasure. It's stacked in shops, wrapped in paper, sold with little price tags and the occasional sample cube on a stick. Time changed things, Brynhild says, and she's right. A mainstream historical fact, by the 18th century, Iceland under Danish rule began shifting away from the old barter system. Coinage became more common, silver, copper, and eventually banknotes started to flow into everyday transactions. Dairy, while still important, gradually stopped being the baseline currency. It didn't happen overnight. It rarely does. But little by little, people started trusting numbers stamped into metal more than the taste of curd. Still, it wasn't a clean break. There are records well into the 19th century of rural Icelanders preferring to be paid in dairy products, wool, or fish. Even today, in some tucked-away corners, a wheel of cheese or a bucket of cream is more welcome than cold hard cash. You stroll into a village shop that proudly sells cheese the old way, not because they have to, but because it's who they are. The owner, a man with a beard shaped like a shovel, says he still remembers his grandmother using cheese as payment for tailoring. Quirky tidbit. In 1927, a woman named Katrin from the Westfjords reportedly walked into a Reykjavik bank and tried to deposit 3 wheels of aged skyr. When told they weren't legal tender, she allegedly replied, "But they're better than your interest rates." Iconic. Brynhild laughs when she retells that story. She's a legend. You sit near the harbor, watching boats bob on soft waves. Fishermen unload crates of cod. Kids ride bikes past stalls selling both ice cream and pickled ram testicles. Iceland keeps the strange things in balance. Do you think, you ask, cheese will ever be currency again? Brynhild thinks about it. Maybe not officially, but symbolically, always. Historians still argue whether cheese should be considered a formal currency in the medieval Icelandic economy. Some say it was just a placeholder in a barter culture. Others argue that, with its standardized value and widespread acceptance, it functioned like money in all but name. But the truth doesn't have to live in footnotes or museum glass. It lives in memory, in habits passed down, in the way someone still brings skyr to a wedding or offers butter as a thank you. You walk a little farther, to a small cottage museum. Inside, behind clear glass, sits a wheel of cheese over 100 years old, cracked, moldy, revered. The plaque reads, "Traded 3 times for land, twice for livestock, once for love." You look at it, and it looks back like it knows things. Like it remembers every deal it sealed, every hand it passed through. The final light of the day slips behind the hills. A sheep bleats from somewhere you can't see. Brynhild pats your shoulder. Ready, you nod. And together, you walk toward a modern town, paved roads, warm lights, and a quiet place where cheese still matters. Now, the hills grow softer as the night deepens. You've walked a long way today through icy pastures and quiet ruins, beside stubborn cows and flickering hearths. You've listened to whispers in the cheese vaults, stood in the shadow of laws carved in stone, and watched wheels of curd become coins in a land too wild for gold. And as the wind slows to a hush, your breath sinks with the stillness of the land. The Icelandic sky so vast, so gray, so gently forgetful stretches above you like a blanket. Clouds drift like cream stirred into twilight. Somewhere, a door creaks shut. Somewhere else, a sheep settles into straw. The taste of skyr still lingers faintly on your tongue. Cool, slightly sour, familiar. You let your thoughts drift backward through the day cheese buried under kennels, bribes made of butter, a woman trading mossgird for mercy. Their lives were hard, their nights longer than yours, but they built a world from what they had. From milk and cold and the strange magic of fermentation. And maybe, just maybe, that's all any of us can do. So let your shoulders drop, let your eyes soften. There's no more walking tonight, no more law codes, no more cheese counting. Just the hum of the wind and the memory of quiet people making quiet trades. Rest easy, traveler, the curds have settled.